Richard let the weight of his words settle over the room, watching as the smug expressions faded into unease. Some officers shifted in their seats, others glanced around, gauging the reaction of their peers. Daniels, now stiff as a board, clenched his jaw but said nothing. He continued, his voice unwavering. Respect, integrity, accountability. These are the pillars of law enforcement. Yet, within minutes of stepping foot into this precinct, I was met with hostility, disrespect, and outright misconduct. Is this the standard you uphold? His gaze swept over the room, challenging anyone to respond. Silence. Richard exhaled slowly, shaking his head. This is exactly why I chose to arrive unnoticed. Because the way an officer behaves when they think no one of importance is watching, that's who they truly are. He locked eyes with Daniels, watching the officer's confidence crumble with each passing second. And if this department has officers who believe they can degrade and belittle people based on their appearance, we have a serious problem. A heavy tension hung in the air. Some officers looked ashamed, while others sat frozen in shock. Captain Harris cleared his throat, his expression unreadable. Richard took a step forward, his voice carrying a finality that left no room for argument. Change is coming. If you are unwilling to uphold the values of this badge with honor, you will not have a place in this precinct. That I promise you. Daniels swallowed hard, his face pale. The room remained deathly quiet, save for the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Richard straightened his shoulders. Dismissed, he said, turning toward the door. As he walked out, whispers erupted behind him. Officers exchanged wary glances, some already realizing the winds of change had arrived. And at the back of the room, Daniels remained standing, his face blank, his hands clenched into fists, as the reality of his mistake sank in. This was only the beginning. Embracing the new expectations and holding themselves to a higher standard. Others remained wary, their skepticism evident in stolen glances and hushed conversations. But Richard knew that real change took time, and he was in it for the long haul. One afternoon, as he reviewed the files on his desk, a knock at the door pulled his attention away. "Come in," he called, setting down the report he had been combing through. The door creaked open, and to his surprise, Officer Daniels stepped inside. Gone was the smug arrogance from their first encounter. Instead, his posture was rigid, his expression uncertain. He hesitated before speaking, as if grappling with words that didn't come easily. "Chief, Daniels cleared his throat, avoiding Richard's gaze. "I wanted to say, I was wrong." Richard leaned back in his chair, studying the man before him. He didn't say anything right away, allowing the moment to breathe. Daniels fidgeted, then finally met his eyes. "I disrespected you. I disrespected the badge." And he exhaled sharply, as if pushing the words out against his own pride. "I don't have an excuse." Richard folded his hands on the desk. "And what exactly do you plan to do about that, Officer Daniels?" His tone was calm but firm. Daniels swallowed hard. "I want to earn my place back," he admitted, his voice quieter than Richard had ever heard it. "Not just in this precinct, but as someone who deserves to wear this uniform." For the first time since taking this job, Richard saw something different in the man before him. Not just regret, but the beginning of accountability. "Change isn't just about saying the right words," Richard said, his voice steady. "It's about proving them through action." He reached for a file on his desk. "Your suspension stands, but if you're serious, you'll take this time to reflect, to learn. I'll arrange for training on community engagement and ethical conduct. And if you come back, you'll do so as a different officer." Daniels gave a stiff nod. "Understood, Chief." Richard watched as he turned to leave, then called out, "Daniels." The officer paused. "The real test isn't in admitting your mistakes. It's in proving you won't repeat them." Daniels nodded again, then walked out, leaving Richard alone with his thoughts. The road ahead was long. Some officers would rise to the challenge, others would resist until the bitter end. But as Richard sat back in his chair, a small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Progress was happening. And for the first time in a long time, Blue Ridge was on the path to something better. Richard took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in. Change was slow, sometimes agonizingly so, but standing there, watching his officers move with a renewed sense of purpose, he knew it was happening. Officer Reyes, the young recruit who had once admitted her fears of speaking up, now walked past him with confidence. She nodded at Richard, a silent acknowledgement of how far she'd come. That small gesture meant more than words ever could. The precinct was no longer the same place he had walked into that first day, disguised as just another nameless face. The walls still held echoes of the past, but they no longer defined the future. The toxic culture that had once festered unchecked was being replaced, slowly, deliberately, with something better. Not everyone had embraced the change. Daniels had fought tooth and nail to keep his position, but his appeal had only unearthed more of his past misdeeds. Excessive force, inappropriate comments, a pattern of behavior that had been ignored for too long. Richard had made sure that was no longer an option. Daniels was out, and with him, the message was clear. There would be no more turning a blind eye. Still, Richard knew policies alone wouldn't change minds. That was a battle fought one conversation at a time. Some officers had resisted the discussions about implicit bias, about accountability, about the way they engaged with the community. Some scoffed, rolling their eyes in meetings, muttering that things were fine the way they were. But Richard never backed down. He knew that for every scoff there was someone else listening, someone who might just start to see things differently. It was those small moments, those glimpses of change, that kept him going. Like the young boy at the community event, Richard had seen the hesitation in the child's eyes, the weight of distrust far too heavy for someone so young. "My dad says the police don't care about us," the boy had whispered. Richard had knelt down to meet his gaze, his voice gentle but certain. "I can't change the past," he had told him, "but I promise we're working to do better. And if you ever need help, you come find me, okay?" The boy had nodded, a small smile breaking across his face. That was why he was here. That was why this fight mattered. By the end of his first year, the department was far from perfect. Mistakes still happened, trust was still being rebuilt, and the scars of the past weren't erased overnight. But there was no denying that things were different. Officers who had refused to evolve were gone, replaced by new recruits who believed in something greater than just power and authority. The community, once wary, once rightfully skeptical, was beginning to see the difference. Complaints about officer behavior had dropped, and for the first time in years, people weren't avoiding the precinct, but walking in willingly. One evening, as Richard stood in the hallway watching officers file out after their shifts, he noticed the way they interacted. The laughter, the camaraderie, it was no longer at someone's expense. It was real. It was genuine. A long road still lay ahead, but for the first time, Richard felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel since stepping into this role. Hope. Change was never easy, but it was worth every fight.